Jazz won last night. Probably not the biggest story, though, of the night, the Jazz win last night. The bigger story was Andy Larsen's love of cotton candy at fancy restaurants in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm more intrigued by that picture you tweeted out, Andy, than I am about the game result last night. What in the world was that?
I was as surprised as you were, Bill. I mean, I went to this restaurant, and it gets these tremendous reviews. It's this executive chef from New York who moved to Minneapolis and created this restaurant, which is like kind of number one on all the Yelp and TripAdvisors and whatever else. So we went there, and, probably hour into the meal, like, we look over to the table next to us, and they have this big thing that looks like cotton candy. And I look over to him, and I actually just asked him, and he was like, "Is that what it looks like?" And it was. And so after we finished, the dessert menu came out, and yep, cotton candy was on it. And so we got some, and it tasted exactly like cotton candy. I wondered if, like, fancy restaurant cotton candy would somehow be better. It was exactly the same. So,
and it was a lot, by the way. It looked like you consumed the entire table.
Yeah, I mean, that it's a little bit perspective there in that photo that's on Twitter, but it was a lot of cotton candy, and somehow, we managed to eat it all.
Well, that's good. Andy, like myself, likes to find the good places to go on the road, and if you're traveling it away from home, you might as well eat well. So next time I go to Minneapolis, I'll have to hit you up for that restaurant recommendation. So what did you take away from the game last night?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good offensive performance against a terrible Minnesota team that's lost now 6 in a row and has averaged giving up 128 points per game in those 6 losses. And look, the Jazz scored 127. So, I think you have to, I guess, give them credit for taking advantage of a bad team. I'm not completely sold that this is the win that solves all their problems, but I did think we saw some good things from the bench last night. I thought that was probably the bench's best game that we've seen so far this season. And maybe the defense wasn't as good as you would hope for, at least not consistently. But in the end, it was a blowout win against a bad team in their building. And, I think at this point of the year, you have to take that if you're the Jazz.
Well, you mentioned the bench. Mudiay actually had a good – I mean, it's really given the night, do we get good Mudiay or bad Mudiay? And last night, you got good Mudiay, 22 minutes, 13 points, and 5 rebounds. If you could get anywhere near that performance, I know they probably wouldn't like to play him 22 minutes every night, but if you could get 12 and 10 and 3 out of him on a nightly basis and he doesn't turn the ball over, that's not bad. Ed Davis, it's still hard to read for me on Ed Davis. I was talking about this with Tony the other day. I think it's still an incomplete grade on Ed just because he hasn't played a lot, but got a little something out of Niang. And, hey, we had a Jeff Green sighting last night, and he was okay too.
Yeah, you're right. And, I think it's funny. I think Mudiay's minutes will go down, obviously, when Mike Conley returns from this hamstring troubles he's been having. But he has been trying to pass the ball a little bit more, and he's not good at it yet. I think that's why we see some of the turnover games that we do, and he does just still dribble into traffic. I think ultimately you probably want to play him as little as possible once Conley does come back, but he is capable of making the mid-range shot. He is capable of getting to the rim. He's not a great finisher there, but, the Minnesota Timberwolves don't have great rim protection, and so he was able to finish a couple of times and kind of add it up to a nice game. I do think he's developing, too, on the defensive end, and as frustrating as his offensive turnovers are and as damaging as they are, I think they were a big reason for some of those blowout losses last week. If he can kind of keep that in check and be a defensive player, then I think it maybe can work out. But ultimately, I think ideally you kind of just replace him in the rotation with Conley a little bit. I'm not saying get Conley off the bench or anything, but kind of reduce his minutes there, and then you can have kind of play next to Jeff Green. I think George Niang can just kind of do what he did last night and hit spot up threes in the corner, and that will be good enough for the Jazz. And then, like you said, Ed Davis, you just have to believe that he's going to be a valuable role player because that's what he's been in for the last 8 years of his career.
Well, Andy, I'm curious, and as I was looking over the box score this morning, DNP coach's decision next to Dante Exum. Are the Jazz approaching a time now where maybe they're getting ready to turn the page on Dante Exum, do you think? I only say that because in a game like that last night where you win relatively handily on the road against Minnesota, for him not to get off the bench because of a coach's decision, are we getting near that point, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there never was really that like garbage time where he would have definitely gotten to play. But you're right. I think it's pretty clear that he's behind Moutier in the rotation unless Moutier has a terrible game, and it's clearly he's not worth the $9.6 million investment that they've make into him every year, and so you'd like to say, okay, let's move on and see if we can use that spot on a more useful player, but the truth is that means you have to trade him to another team that wants him, right? And at this point, it's not like teams are knocking on Dennis Lindsey's door or making his phone ring to try to get a guy who doesn't give you as much of his salary back. And the Jazz should have reason to play Dante Exum and seem not to. They see him in practice more than anybody else and still choose to play Emmanuel Moutier over him, right? So.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that he may get traded as part of maybe his salary ballast more than anything else, but you probably have to include some value to get him to go somewhere, and maybe you get another guy who makes a lot of money and doesn't contribute as much back. But you're right, it does feel like it's probably time to move on.
I understand why they brought him back. I understand that. But I'd love to get the old sodium pentothal out and inject Dennis Lindsey and try to figure out why, because to me it felt like they were bidding against themselves a couple of years ago, Andy, and to give him $9 million a year, even if somebody else was in the running, nobody was going to give him the old Portland Trailblazers poison pill contract. I just felt like $9 a year felt really excessive, and 3 years felt long too. It almost felt to me like you could have given him one at 7.5 and then a team option for that second year to see how he played. But to give him 3 guaranteed just felt like so much, especially considering there wasn't much of a market out there for him.
Yeah, I would have been really interested to see what he would have gotten in that restricted free agency because, even if you do see, you're right, I don't think he was going to get like a poison pill offer. And even if you let him go out there and have him get some sort of contract that is similar to what he got, you have the opportunity to match it if you want and not lose that asset for nothing. And I think that's what the Jazz were a little bit afraid of. Honestly, the situation looked a little bit different 2 years ago too, where we just hadn't seen Dante play as much. He had only really played 2.5 NBA seasons, and it kind of felt like, okay, it could be around the corner for Dante. And clearly, I think another knee surgery has kind of sapped a little bit more of that mobility. And then, he just hasn't played that well when he has been healthy. So it's a sad story, and it's an understandable mistake, but it's clear that he's not going to be the player they envisioned, and it's really kind of going to be a struggle for him to actually contribute to this year's Jazz team at all.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't wish any ill will on him. It's just one of those situations, whether it was his game or the injury or whatever it was, a combination of both the injuries. He's just never been able to find his consistent footing with this club. All right, moving on real quick before I let you go. As you said at the top, last night's win doesn't cure all ills. So I'd just be curious if you were kind of listing and diagnosing the things that are most wrong with the Jazz and putting a list together, what are a couple of things at the top and how fixable are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bench is still an issue. Last night they played well, and I'm not convinced that they will play well moving forward. So I'd like to see an addition or two there. Obviously, the turnovers have been a big problem this year, and that's something that they need to kind of figure out, as well as the ball movement. And I think those things are really related, where, as a result of them not knowing where their teammates are going to be on any given point of a play, it feels like guys like Donovan Mitchell and Bojan Bogdanovic feel like they have to drive into traffic and kind of create things themselves just to kind of make anything happen at all. It just feels kind of herky-jerky at times. And, I think Minnesota's defensive mistakes masked some of that, and the Jazz got the ball moving and played well last night. And maybe they use that to kind of develop their offensive game moving forward. But right now it does just feel like it's a my turn, your turn kind of offense. And to me, I think that needs to change, for the Jazz to be anywhere near the team that we thought they could be coming into the year.
Well, first of all, everybody's got to get healthy. But assuming everybody gets healthy, when do you begin to panic or worry if you're Quinn Snyder or Dennis Lindsey that things aren't clicking? Is it the beginning of January, mid-January? When do you start? When's that time where you start scratching your head going, okay, we may have an issue here?
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got 15 or 20 really easy games coming up. I mean, we obviously the Minnesota game this week. You've got Golden State coming up tomorrow. It's going to be pretty easy for this next little stretch of games. They can play a lot of games at home. They play a lot of teams like the Thunder, who I think you should be able to beat. And if you still have kind of those problems against the bottom or middle of the NBA, then I think you start to really worry and you start to say, okay, where did we miscalculate here and what do we need to do to fix it? But I think this is kind of the get right stretch for the Jazz. Is you get a chance to, we all know that practice time is limited in the NBA. So now all of a sudden you've got real game time against lesser teams that you should be beating, and you can kind of start to develop some of that chemistry. So if it's still not if it's still problematic, if it's still herky-jerky in 20 games from now after they've played some of these bad teams, then I think there's a real opportunity to be worried and make some changes.
Read him in the pages of the Salt Lake Tribune. His triple team is outstanding after almost every Jazz basketball game. Andy, thanks. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bill.
There you go. Andy Larsen with us here on the Bill Riley Show today.